This year marks 35 years to the fall of the Berlin Wall. It once divided Berlin and Germany for decades, bringing misery to many people. So, what's left of it today?
To be honest, there aren't many traces left, but they do exist, and you can visit them. For example, a heavily guarded border point where a Third World War almost broke out, a village that the wall tore in half, known as Little Berlin. And we meet one of the artists who transformed the Berlin Wall into a work of art.
Join us on an exciting journey through history. We will visit 5 places in Berlin and Germany, which will help us understand what it meant to live in a divided city and country.
Whenever I see parts of the Berlin Wall today, I have to think of the border between India and Pakistan. Even though we share a similar culture, it is almost impossible to visit each other's countries due to the political history. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, I wasn't born yet. But later, I saw the videos. All the many emotional people. What seemed impossible had come true. A peaceful revolution. To this day, it is a miracle that gives hope.
So let's start exploring the wall in Berlin and Germany.
We start in Berlin. Our first location is Checkpoint Charlie on Friedrichstraße, which was one of the most famous border crossings ever.
There aren't any original sandbags nor guardhouses here anymore, but tourists still love this place. It's hard to imagine today that World War III almost broke out here.
At the end of World War II, the Allies had divided not only Germany but also Berlin into 4 occupation zones. The western zones were administered by the US, British and French, and the eastern zone by the Soviets, known as the GDR.
At first, people could still cross the border, but that ended when the GDR built the wall on August 13, 1961.
The wall was built and all of West Berlin was sealed off. Here at Checkpoint Charlie, American and Soviet tanks drove up, armed with live ammunition, and stood facing each other for more than 16 hours. Berlin and the world held their breath. The images were shown around the world, making Checkpoint Charlie famous.
Fortunately, the tanks withdrew, the situation calmed down, and the wall became a sad part of everyday life.
Checkpoint Charlie was the border crossing for diplomats and officials for 28 years, until November 9th, 1989, when the wall opened here at Checkpoint Charlie completely unexpectedly. Matthias Brauner was there. He was 23 years old at the time and captured the evening's events in West Berlin with his camera. His photos can now be seen in a pop-up exhibition.
What were the emotions that night?
Ich glaube, ein Wort trifft es am besten und das war das Wort Wahnsinn. Einfach nur Wahnsinn. Das ist das Wort, was ich auch immer wieder gehört habe und so würde ich das auch beschreiben.
On November 9th, Matthias Brauner, like so many others, heard the unbelievable news. The GDR announced it would open the wall, perhaps as soon as that very night. He made his way to Checkpoint Charlie, where GDR guards could barely hold back the crowds.
Das ist derjenige, der die Leitung dort hatte und der erklärte jetzt den Westberlinern, dass sie doch bitte nach Hause gehen sollen. Hier wird heute nichts passieren. Und das fand ich so wirklich beeindruckend damals, weil allen war klar, hier wird heute Geschichte geschrieben. Hier sind wir im Geschehen schon etwas weiter. Hier sieht man schon, dass diese Armeeangehörigen kaum noch jemand eine Mütze aufhat. Und zwar griffen die aus West-Berlin dann immer mal wieder rüber und holten sich die Mützen von den Soldaten dort. Also auf dem Bild sieht man auch noch mal sehr schön eine Person, die es dann geschafft hat, so eine Mütze zu erobern und dann natürlich auch aufgesetzt hat und dann begeistert dann entsprechend auch diese Mütze dann trägt. Ja, das ist, glaube ich, ein sehr lustiges Bild hier an der Stelle.
Around midnight, the border opened.
Das sind so die ersten Ostberliner, die dann gekommen sind. Und man sieht halt, sie werden wirklich auf Händen getragen. Man sieht das hier in den Händen. Sie werden begeistert gefeiert und zwar jeder Einzelne wurde hier gefeiert. Wirklich jeder, die wurden auf die Schultern genommen. Und er hält seinen Personalausweis nach oben und zeigt, hier, ich bin aus der DDR. Von allen Seiten sieht man die Gesichter, die strahlenden Gesichter, das Lachen, das diesen Moment halt, der das dokumentiert.
There's not much left of the wall at Checkpoint Charlie today. It's mainly a popular photo spot.
But you can find out what the wall actually looked like in other places.
Our second stop is the memorial on Bernauer Straße. It consists of a large open-air exhibition and a documentation center. These poles show where the wall once stood, mainly through the middle of Bernauer Straße.
The houses on one side of the street were in the west and the other the east. And in between stood the wall. People lived only a few meters away but weren't allowed to reach each other.
When the wall was built overnight on August the 13th, 1961, desperate people jumped out of the windows on Bernauer Straße. Their houses were in the east, but the street was in the west. In the following years, the houses in the border strip were cleared, then bricked up and finally demolished. Over the years, the simple wall became a sophisticated border fortification system. You can get an overview from the documentation center.
Bernauer Straße is the only place in Berlin where you can still see the old border strip.
This stretch of the wall was re-erected in 1998. From up here, you can see that there were two walls. This animation shows what it looked like between them. The border strip was brightly lit at night. This is where the GDR border guards shot at those trying to escape. In the west, the border was known as the death strip. It was secured with these barriers and steel floor mats covered in 14-centimeter thick spikes. And this is the Berlin Wall as we know it today, 3.6 meters high, the last barrier before West Berlin. The wall was almost insurmountable. Many who wanted to flee to the west, to freedom, looked for other options.
This path leads to one of the legendary escape tunnels that people used back in the days.
There were several escape tunnels dug by those in West Berlin who wanted to help. One of the longest dates back to 1964. 57 people made it to freedom before it was discovered. Today, you can visit a replica on Bernauer Straße. But there wasn't always a happy ending. 140 people died either by being shot or from accidents that occurred while trying to escape at the Berlin Wall.
The memorial at Bernauer Straße is very moving, since it's a stark reminder of the once tragic history of the city.
Our third spot is completely different. It's colorful, cheerful, and original. The East Side Gallery.
It is 1.3 kilometers long and was painted by artists from all over the world after the fall of the wall. It is in fact one of the largest open-air galleries in the world.
It's just fun to walk along here and look at over 100 paintings. Each one is different and special in its own way. One of the most famous murals is often referred to as the Fraternal Kiss by artist Dmitry Frubel. It shows Erich Honecker and Leonid Brezhnev, the heads of the state of the GDR and the Soviet Union, kissing. It represented the strong relationship between the two socialist states. The West Berliners had always painted their side of the wall. Of course, this was strictly forbidden on the East Berlin side, and the wall was barren. Until 1990.
Hi!
I meet Teresa Casanueva from Cuba. She's one of the artists who transformed part of the East Berlin side of the wall into a street art gallery. So, what is the message of this painting?
Yo quería expresar en ese entonces con el mural la energía y el espíritu que se sentía en ese momento en todo el país, por la caída del muro, por la reunificación de Alemania, y en mi mural es prácticamente un fragmento de algo que puede seguir creciendo y que trasciende las fronteras del muro.
For many tourists nowadays, the East Side Gallery is just a photo spot. But what does it mean for you?
En el pasado yo nunca pude imaginarme la importancia que iba a tener este mural, o sea, este tramo de muro, que en definitiva es el tramo de muro más grande, más largo, que aún existe en Berlín, y ha sido gracias precisamente a esta acción de artistas, ¿no? De lo contrario no existiría.
Teresa was studying art in the GDR at the time when her professors told her about the East Side Gallery project. She even brought me her original sketch from 1990. She used it to apply to participate in the project. It was an exciting time full of opportunities and changes, and she was right in the middle of it.
La importancia que tenía ese hecho y la importancia que tenía pintar un mural en un muro que hasta hace poco tiempo antes era el muro que tenía encerrada a la gente, un sitio donde también murieron personas que querían abandonar la RDA, fueron asesinados, ¿no? Y darle precisamente todo un significado que es todo lo contrario a eso.
Since then, Teresa has continued her art career in Berlin. She sometimes gives guided tours of the East Side Gallery. It is important to her to tell the story to young people. We are now leaving Berlin and driving to our fourth location, a place called Point Alpha. This US observation post was on the border of former West Germany, exactly between the present-day states of Thuringia and Hesse.
Point Alpha was considered a major hotspot in the Cold War. And that's because the US troops were certain that if the Soviet troops were to invade the West, they would invade here.
The terrain is relatively flat, so during a surprise attack, Soviet troops could have penetrated very quickly and deeply into West Germany. That's why the Americans built an observation post right here, as close as possible to the GDR border fortifications.
This US watchtower is only 50 meters away from that GDR watchtower.
Stationed in the US camp were soldiers of the Black Horse Regiment. Their assignment in the event of an attack was to defend the area until reinforcements arrived. It was a powerful unit.
Tanks were only allowed to drive up to this red line in the camp. Crossing it would have been considered a provocation and could possibly have triggered a war.
This US watchtower wasn't built until 1985. Back then, nobody expected that 4 years later, the Cold War and the division of Germany would be history. The fifth and last stop on our journey lies on the border between Thuringia and Bavaria, the small village of Modlereuth. About 50 people live here. Some are Bavarians, others Thuringians, separated only on paper by an administrative border. But that had never mattered. They went to the same school, the same bars. They lived, worked, and celebrated together.
This small stream has always been the natural border between Thuringia and Bavaria. And it was never a problem until 1945, when the Allies divided Germany between themselves.
Suddenly, West Modlereuth was in the American zone, while East Modlereuth was in the Soviet zone. The administrative border had suddenly become a national border, separating friends and families. People from the western part of the village could no longer go to the same school or bar because they were now in the east. It was also forbidden for people on opposite sides to wave or even greet each other. This eventually became impossible anyway, as the border fortifications were extended, pushing people farther apart.
American soldiers nicknamed the place Little Berlin.
Heiner Wehr was 19 years old when he, like all young men in East Germany, started military service. In 1968, he was stationed here in Modlerød. His job was to prevent people from escaping.
Wir waren froh, wenn wir einen Dienst beendet hatten, es kam keiner. Denn wir mussten ja das zur Not auch mit Waffengewalt machen und das in den jungen Jahren weiß man nicht, ob wir da Gebrauch genommen hätten oder auch nicht. Gell?
Fortunately, he never had to make that decision. While serving in the army, Ver fell in love with a woman from Thuringia, got married and never left. He was in Modlerød on that happy day in 1989 when the wall came down.
Wo die Mauer gefallen ist, wo erstmal nur ein kleines Tor reingemacht wurde, das war sehr emotional. Die Bürger waren in Tränen, das war schlimm damals, aber jeder hat sich gefreut und da gab es Blasmusik und Rostbratwurst und alles. Eine herzliche Begrüßung zwischen jeden hat jeden gegrüßt. Ja. Und umarmt, das war also sehr emotional. Also es läuft einer eiskalten Bucken runter. Ja.
The people of Modlerød left part of the wall standing so that future generations could understand what it meant to live in a divided village in a divided country.
This concludes our search for traces of history 35 years after the fall of the wall in Berlin and Germany. Have you ever visited one of these places? Let us know in the comments.